They're coming, they're coming, they're coming, they're coming, they're coming to take our wild horses away. They got their reason, they got their reasons, but don't believe them, don't believe them. It's so the cattle corporations can have their way. So don't let them, I said don't let them, don't let them take our wild and free away. 'Cause we're Americans, we're Americans, we're Americans, and we're born of the wild and the free. Yes, we're born of the wild and the free. First they come for the horses, and then they come for you and I. Can't you see, 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 can't you see? 'Cause they fear anything that's wild and free. Our wild horses are a symbol of our freedoms, and they rode us through history. They belong to all Americans, and they belong to you and me. Now the bells they toll for our freedom, and the bells they toll for all that's wild. And the bells they toll for our wild horses. Can't you hear them calling to you and I, to you and I, to you and I. Oh, where do all the horses go? The unwanted ones, the unwanted ones. Where do all those horses go? Oh, they go to slaughter too many of them. That's no use to us anymore. Those that raised for us and won money for us, and those that made you score. Like the great Ferdinand who won the Kentucky Derby. He was bought for a price, and sent to Japan on his journey. And when he wouldn't fulfill his lineage, they did kill. And they sent that great Ferdinand to slaughter. Oh, noble horse, oh, noble friend of noble heart and mind. You're a friend of man, you're a friend of man, you're a friend of mankind. Yes, you fought in our wars, and you died by our swords. You make heroes out of cowboys, and your wildness sets us free. And now they're going to Mexico, where they stab them in the spine. What a way to go, what a way to go, to a friend who's so divine. And what have we done? And what have we become? To treat such a friend so unkind. And I hear you cry, and I hear you cry, oh, Jesus and God save me. Yes, I hear you cry, yes, I hear you cry, oh, Jesus and God save me. But what have you done to them? I said, what have you done for them? They're coming, they're coming, they're coming, they're coming, they're coming to take our wild horses away. Well, even though that's outdated in its information, it's now called the SAFE Act. It's the same act to stop horse slaughter in the United States. And luckily, because of all you wonderful viewers out there that have called your Congress members and your senators and said you don't want your tax dollars going towards slaughtering our wild and domestic horses, we've been able to stop it despite the Trump administration wanting to slaughter our wild horses. So I want to thank all of you out there for listening to this program, going online, doing your own research, and helping us save our wild and domestic horses from this terrible, obscene industry, diabolical in every way, cruel in every way, and those that vote for it should not be representing us in any way. So I'm putting up now Marie Cantwell's, she's a senator in Washington, and she, on her committee, she's a ranking member on her committee, which is the Natural Energy Resource Committee, has the ability to tell BLM, you must not round up any more horses until you can prove that we have an independent count that's going to prove that what you say are out there in numbers are actually out there, and what you say you have in holding are actually in holding. Because I'm going to read to you a letter that was written to the Department of Justice in December 7th, 2015, and it was signed by former Congressman Sam Farr and Congresswoman Michelle Grisham. And they, in the first paragraph here, and we'll watch this footage of a roundup as I read it to you. It says, Dear Mrs. Lynch, she was the Attorney General of the United States at that time. The Office of Inspector General of the United States Department of Interior recently published a troubling report that details the Bureau of Land Management's failure to follow current law and policy through its administration of the Wild Horse and Burro Program. As the OIG report outlines, between 2008 and 2012, the BLM failed to prevent Colorado-based livestock hauler Tom Davis from acquiring 1,700 wild horses, which Davis subsequently sold to kill buyers. These kill buyers sent the horses to Mexico, where they were slaughtered for human consumption. Furthermore, BLM spent approximately $140,000 in taxpayers' funds in transporting those horses to Tom Davis. Although the OIG investigation was referred to the U.S. Attorney's Office in the District of Colorado and the State of Colorado, Conjos County District Attorney's Office, both offices declined civil or criminal prosecution. The OIG also referred evidence to the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of New Mexico, and this evidence is of the U.S. Department of Agriculture, USDA certified veterinarian, who admitted that he never inspected any of the horses as required by the law before signing international health certificates, which are required before horses can be exported. So there you have it, folks. This veterinarian that's supposed to inspect these horses to make sure they're healthy for consumption of meat, USDA, so corrupt, didn't even inspect these horses, and no one's being prosecuted. And this is still, in my opinion, I suspect our wild horses that are in holding are still going to slaughter. And so I call constantly, about two times a week, to Senator Cantwell's office. And finally, I got through to Nancy Hadley. I wrote her a letter. She's sort of the head staff person there. And I wrote her a letter saying that the scheduling secretary and the press secretary are ignoring for the last 3 years my request to get this information to Senator Marie Cantwell, and that nothing's happening. So finally, Nancy calls me and says, well, you have to go to the Natural Resources Committee. And I said, I've already been there, and they tell me I have to come to Senator Marie Cantwell's office. So they sort of shuffle you back and forth. And so I said, okay, well, we'll try again. So then I try to get a hold of a David Brooks, who is a staff person on that committee that's supposed to be gathering all the evidence of what BLM is doing, both good and bad, and he ignores me. So I've called 4 times, left messages. He's never at his desk. What are these people doing? You know, what are they doing with our tax dollars? So this bad kind of behavior, just ignoring the public, I'm a reporter. I'm being ignored. I can't give you the information. I can't give Senator Marie Cantwell the information. She's not interested, obviously. And it just goes on, folks. And our tax dollars are going to this waste. Now, I want you to watch this wonderful footage of these horses. Does it look like the environment is being degraded by these horses? Senator Marie Cantwell believes that they're overpopulated. That was a letter that she sent me, that she's going along with the concern. Now you can see how healthy these horses are. Yes, there are wild horses that their teeth wear down and they die. Same with deer, same with bear. Everything dies. So do we die. Our own population, our own vets out there are homeless. They don't have any teeth anymore. They're not getting the proper care either. So these BLM officials that try to tell you, oh, we have to round up our wild horses because they're not healthy, is a big fat lie. And Senator Marie Cantwell needs to start doing something about it. And thanks to you folks out there that are calling and mandating for your Congress members, we are starting to make headway. We were able to stop this Trump administration from slaughtering our wild horses, even though the appropriations committee wanted to. I'm going to show you right now who voted to slaughter horses. These are the members in the appropriations. Robert Adderholt from Alabama is a big advocate of horse slaughter. Ken Calvert, he's on the SAFE Act, which is to stop horse slaughter, yet he voted to reinstate horse slaughter. That's how two-faced he is. All these members here that you're seeing want to reinstate horse slaughter. And luckily, because of your calls, they weren't able to do so. But they're going to try next year. All these members here want to reinstate horse slaughter. And they need to be removed as Congress people. They're mishandling our tax dollars. They have no heart, in my opinion. Anyone who would want to send our horses to slaughter can't possibly have a heart. It's cruel, and these are our animals that rode us through history, and we owe them our protection and our love. And we don't want our tax dollars going towards that. So having said that, we're going to now listen to a wonderful man, John Cox, who has been on the forefront of flying over, getting reports together of BLM's mismanagement. And let's hear from him and continue your calls, folks. I want you to continue your calls because it is working. And that's the number that you can call and say, no more BLM roundups. I don't want my tax dollars going to that. Put these horses back on their herd areas where they belong. Stop lying to us. And you are making a difference. You really are. And I also want to thank, at this time, Congressman Jimmy Panetta here in Monterey, California, because he has voted to stop horse slaughter in the 2018 budget. And that's terrific. So for all of you there that have done this, thank you so much. And we will continue our fight to keep America wild, keep America beautiful, because guess what? It is our wildlife. It is our parks, our national forests. It is our public lands that belong to us that make America beautiful and great. Okay, so folks, I have on the line John Cox. He is a reporter and a dedicated one trying to find out the truth about what's going on with our wild horses. So what have you found out so far? My whole situation is I'm very, very concerned that the BLM is secretly slaughtering these wild horses without our knowing, because there has been absolutely no prosecution of BLM employees for doing it in the past. And under the OIG report, it did state that they suspect thousands more have gone by the same fate. So what's to stop them now? So John, what information do you have from your sources that say that the public really needs to contact the Congress members? And I'm going to be putting their names on the screen here so that people can call them and let them know that we care about this issue.
Well, thank you from the horses. They certainly will appreciate this. But I do, to start this conversation, I think it would be best to take a step back rather than just recite things about the overpopulation, because that's already a biological given that the BLM is in error totally. Horses don't live forever, number one. Number two is the fact that 100% mares don't give birth 100% of the time on a yearly basis. Number three, foals do die out there in the public lands at about 50%. But we can step back to the environmental assessments, which is a very significant piece of paperwork that is mandatory in accord with NEPA and the laws of this land. Now, when we go to the environmental assessments, we find that they're all in error. They've either been copied from previous environmental assessments from 5, 6, and even 10 years ago. They have no information in regard to why they're doing a roundup, which they're supposed to have by law. And what is the consequence and what is the positive values of having a roundup in regard to the environment directly. That's what these particular issues within the environmental assessment are pointedly in favor of giving to the public, so we know that our taxpayer dollars are being spent appropriately. Well, of course, they lie about the environmental assessment and say they need rounded up, but they give no evidence. There's virtually no evidence in any of the environmental assessments for a roundup to actually happen.
Well, now, John, I'd like to just interrupt here. What we're watching is a roundup, and if people notice the landscape, it's in beautiful shape. You know, and here they're rounding up these horses and running at terrific speeds with this helicopter roundup, which is very dangerous for the horses because, you know, they could trip in holes and all that. And here's this beautiful landscape, and if you were just not to look at this, you would think that from the environmental assessment that there is no landscape, there is no brush left, there's nothing, you know?
Exactly.
Yeah. So
and thereby the problem. Now we have a couple of 3 federal judges had requested that the Bureau of Land Management start making truthful and reasonable remarks that are guided under a common sense virtues and the principle of law. So just the last one was just last month. I think it was the Friends of Animals versus the Bureau of Land Management, in one of their roundups where the judge came out.
It was the Friends, Friends of Animals.
Yeah, Friends of Animals.
Yeah.
And the judge virtually did make the statement directly. This environmental assessment situation and the NEPA laws have been broken.
Mm-hmm. And I just want to say here that Senator Cantwell wrote me a letter stating that she's going along with BLM, that BLM has to obey the NEPA laws. Well, she's saying that that's why they have to round them up. So she's not paying attention to any of the information that we are sending her. And that's why it's so important for people to call her, because she has a responsibility to us, the citizens, to protect our wildlife on our public lands, and she's not doing so.
Well, we have to remember that those lands out there are ecological habitats, and there are laws that govern the any. There are laws that govern these habitats, and NEPA is one of them, and very significant, and environmental assessments are another, and a very significant things to work out. Now, when we get to the roundups and the AMLs, those are the the AML is the numbers that they use on horses that can actually live on these HMAs or these environmental ecological habitats. But what we find is they only support the falsification of the actual horse herd counts that are, as I stated before, they're biologically impossible to come up with those numbers. It just doesn't happen. And we've also found that during flyovers, there's really a limited amount of number of horses. They don't herd like we see on the roundups and that kind of thing, maybe 150 or 200 horses. Those have been rounded up and herded together within 2 or 3 days before the roundup. Wild horses do not herd, period. What they do is they travel in bands of say, a minimum of 3, a maximum of maybe 12, maybe 16, depending. But the stallions will be getting kicked out, and the mares will also go off on their own directions eventually as well. So those bands kind of are self-monitoring little clans of family that can pretty much take care of themselves out there in the wilds and whatnot, and therefore they don't need the pesticide PZP either.
No, well, they don't. And here you're seeing these healthy, beautiful horses being rounded up because BLM is saying that they're starving to death. I mean, and then they move the cattle in, and luckily there's enough people that are not only watching this program but also watching what's going on YouTube, that this is a building momentum, and that to me that shows promise that the American public wants to save our wildlife.
Well, I've always, on the flyovers I've been involved in, which was up to about 1.5 years ago, I think, if I look at the dates correctly, what we find is I don't find a 50-to-1 cattle-to-horse ratio. What I find is close to 70-to-1 or even 75-to-1.
Really?
Cattle overwhelmingly over the horses. As you fly over, say, Nevada, for example, or Eastern Oregon, you can fly for, 20, 30 minutes and cover quite a bit of acreage. And you might see one family band of, for example, 6. And the rest are cattle that are roaming those lands all around. And you can actually see the tracking of the cattle from aerial view, and you can see the prevalent destruction that is going on when you can see the trample effect of the cattle when it goes through, say, a gulch or a valley floor or a basin. And by the way, those cattle should not be on that the greater basin within those areas, because the plates and that kind of thing of the actual topsoil and that kind of thing is just not very, very deep at all. So we have thin plating through that whole, as far as the geological aspects as well. So there's a lot of problems with the cattle being on that land in Eastern Oregon and in Nevada as well, on the Great Plains. So buffalo don't even roam there from natural instinct, because they would crush in the plate values and that kind of thing, and kind of just destroy that land. So, but then we can move on to, yes, there's horses in holding. When they first get there, they're extremely healthy. Burns Corral is a good example, and you and I discussed that earlier, where people have actually, they allow people in when the horses look very healthy, and then they close it off to the public when they start deteriorating, and they get to the point where they wouldn't even go through a pinch test because of dehydration or because of lack of food, lack of minerals. Horses need mineral blocks and out here, and the grasses aren't that healthy and whatnot when they're in at captured capacity. So you need selenium blocks and that kind of thing, which the BLM does not provide at all.
Well, we're watching right now, this holding area, and there's no shade for them. And, it's just out there. So I'm so glad that, people like you that are, going out there doing fly, reporting the truth and what you're seeing, because that proves to the public, okay, wait a minute, we're being lied to. Our money is, our hard-earned tax dollars is being stolen from us. And this is just a big corrupt system that has to stop. And I say to people, please contact Senator Marie Cantwell, because she has the ability to say to her committee, okay, we're getting enough pressure now. We're going to have to make sure that BLM is held accountable for what it is saying its numbers are as opposed to what is actually happening. So tell us more about what you found out there. You're saying you found 70 head of cattle to one horse. Is that what you're saying in your fly?
At least. I think I could even reasonably state that it's 75 to 1 with hardly and little to no effort, because of the fact of the how long it takes to fly from and actually find and locate one band of horses to the next band. I mean, it's on that valley basin. It might go for example, out here on the Klamath Basin, it goes for 25 miles. So you can get on the basin in some parts of eastern Oregon, over by the Steens Mountains, for example, and you can fly for, 20, 25 miles within one basin and just see cattle. And then you might pop over a hill or a valley, and by golly, there's a couple of 3 wild horses. And then you fly another, say 10 or 15 miles, and well, there's another band of like 6 horses or whatever. That's kind of the way it goes. So during a day's flight, you're not seeing very many bands of horses. Maybe 8 bands, maybe 9 if you're lucky. So, and this is the problem. But then, and to make a transition here, we also get to the inventory sheets that the Bureau of Land Management puts out when they capture these horses. And what we find there is, and I think I've discussed these inventory sheets with you before, the fact that they count dead horses on the range in order to pay the contractors. So despite the fact that they're not being loaded up or anything else, they're not being taken over to Burns on a temporary facility, they're dead on the range, they're marked dead in inventory, but that contractor still gets, the $1,000 to $1,250 per horse. And then we find out that some of these people are family to, say, the Burns BLM employees and their private contractors. So we're getting ripped off pretty good as taxpayers. I mean, this whole program is nothing but corrupt on just about every level.
It is, and it's due in part because people are supporting these public welfare ranchers like Ted Bundy, when we should, if you have to eat meat, be supporting the private ranchers that are going through that extra expense to keep their cattle on private lands.
Well, in Oregon, welfare ranching is only about 7%, because quite frankly, a lot of the ranchers have ethics and pride, and they don't want to take government subsidies, because then the government can step in on your private business at any given time as well. And they just don't want to get involved in the corruption either. I have quite a few friends that are cattle people near my old hometown, and they tell me that no, it's the corruption is too large and vast, and one day they're all going to get busted, and they're all going to have to pay that price for what they ripped off today. So, and that's kind of right. When we start looking at the inventory sheets, then we find, for example, out of Burns, Oregon, and when they get transferred over to a more of a permanent habitat or pins or whatever you want to call them, kind of concentration camps, I guess, if you wanted to compare it. But then we also find more horses that disappear or die during the transportation to another holding facility.
So are you saying, now you mentioned earlier something about farmers are telling you that the facilities are filling up and then the horses disappear in the middle of the night?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Well, the Burns Corral is a bad one. They have I think we were explaining, I was telling you about logistically, they have a big meadow, and it looks like a wooded area, probably about 4 or 5 miles from the Burns holding facility. But what it is, it's a fenced-in area. I don't know, it's plenty of acres of fenced-in area. And it looks like when they go out there, they do photo ops, and it appears for anybody looking on that they're releasing those horses back out onto public lands. Well, in reality, when the cameras are gone, they're sliding the gates back out, and they're closing that area off. Now, we have testimony from several people around that Burns area that they see kill buyer trucks coming in at 10, 11 o'clock at night, and they go out. Okay. Well, these are the meadows in that meadowland are nothing more than pasture facilities that are fenced in. And when they drop the horses off, supposedly they're letting them back out into the public lands in order to roam freely. Mm-hmm. They're not really, because that area, there's fencing behind all the trees and at the other end of the meadow as well.
Is it really that, huh?
Oh, it's they don't care, because hardly anybody ever goes out to these Burns areas and some of the remote facilities where the horses are stored.
But you've seen this fence?
Oh, I've seen it. It was referred to me by a fellow that used to do a lot of logging and that kind of thing out there. Mm-hmm. There is a benefit. I'm a Oregonian, have been all my life, and I know a lot of Oregonians. So we don't like what's going on with the Bureau of Land Management. They have a very deep-rooted hatred toward the public, and the public has a very deep-rooted hatred toward them. Mm-hmm. Yeah, along the Rogue River, they literally plowed down, gave people 2 weeks' notice, and plowed their houses down after the 2 weeks and torched them up. So in order to make a wilderness area, but that's a whole separate story. Mm-hmm. But now the kill buyers come in at about 10 or 11 o'clock at night. They'll go out there to these meadows, and the BLM some of the employees, to make extra money, will go ahead and have them rounded up and ready to go. So they just immediately get the trucks loaded up and get them out of there as fast as they can.
And so then you're suspecting that they go to slaughter. In other words, they don't put them back in the holding facility, they just disappear?
Oh, at 11 o'clock at night, there's nobody doing business at 11 o'clock at night.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's just theft. That's all that is.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, that's common sense. And then they go either up to Blaine, Washington, or they go down to, the border around the Mexican border and that kind of thing. Because the DOT essentially doesn't stop and check the inventory list or stop and check for numbers of wild horses. So that's another level of situation that we don't have to protect our tax money, is the fact that the Department of Transportation doesn't take part in checking these drivers to see if they're stolen horses or if they're wild horses.
Yes, the Animal Angels did a report on that, how the paperwork just didn't match up. And they were using the same paperwork for these wild horses that, they were using that same paperwork over and over for even new loads. It was the same paperwork for the old loads,
Well, then again, we have witnesses at the Eugene auction, for example, that pretty much have seen the BLM police out of Salem, I believe, or Eugene, take blank transportation forms and that kind of thing that needed to be filled out, bills of lading, into the main office there at the auction. So you're not supposed to have on the trucks blank bill of lading forms. That's a felony. But once again, the Department of Transportation doesn't check, so we have a big problem with that. That's because the inventory sheets, we've burned the Bureau of Land Management and have turned some of those into the Department of Interior IG's office. And we had something like $385,000 worth of dead horses that were paid for, but they died on the range. That's a lot of money. That's taxpayer money.
And what do you mean they died on the range?
Well, they just they weren't collected or anything. They were just listed as dead in the inventory before transporting to Burns. this is out of Murders Creek, Oregon. And they had a bait and trap roundup there, and they just, there were just so many horses over probably about a 3-year time period, I believe, without looking at the paperwork. I think it was about 3 or 4 year time period. And about $385,000 worth of dead horses that never got transported anywhere. They were put on the inventory sheets.
In other words, they were saying that they were dead horses, but there's no proof that they were dead.
Exactly.
So we're talking with John Cox. He is a reporter, and he is, trying to inform the public about what is really going on with our wild horses and BLM. So, so you've looked at those records, and have you confronted BLM about this, and what has been their response?
Oh, absolutely. I think the fellow's name is Rob Smart out there at BLM. He's one of the supervisors out there over the horses. I asked him directly, what's going on here with these dead horses? They don't seem to be loading up, and they're not going to burns, and you seem to be paying the contractors. And he just, like a typical BLM response, oh, no, that didn't happen. And then we asked the lady that was with the forestry. It was a supposed forestry side bait and trap situation that the BLM was supervising, because the BLM did not have the appropriate environmental assessment, and they left it unsigned as well. They just copied an environmental assessment from 5 years ago or whatever. And so the roundup with the BLM got discontinued because of that. Nobody wanted to sign the environmental assessment and take responsibility for just copying it. And then saying that, it's official, we should have a roundup now. That's the way they work. That's just, that's it. So they had the forestry round them up, and then we found the forestry didn't have an appropriate EA either. Nobody said anything about that. So we just, what do you do when they're so corrupt that they just outright do these things because nobody apparently says anything?
Yeah. They can. This letter to the Department of Justice on December 7th, 2015, the fact that the USDA didn't inspect the horses that were going for slaughter in European countries that were illegally sent to slaughter. The whole thing, and folks, this is why I report to you, because the horses are our messengers, and they are literally, as far as Indian prophecy goes, and in my own way, I really believe our horses are spiritual messengers to the people. After all, they rode us through history. They have been in our wars. They have plowed our fields and fed us. They are our guardian spirits. And we have become so despiritualized that all we know now is tech. We don't know anything other than what science can prove. So the unseen and the intuitive side of our natures, which is so much more intelligent and in connection with the universe at large, we've basically lost that to just being on smartphones and depending on what science can tell us. But it is my belief that the horses are our spiritual messengers, and they are telling us how very corrupt our government is. And by you calling these people that represent us and saying, you need to respond, you need to make sure my tax dollars are not going to murdering our wildlife. This is important to me, and you have been doing that because that's the only thing I believe that has stopped these diabolical Congress members in Congress that wanted to reinstate slaughter in the 2018 budget. They were stopped because enough of you called, and that's why I say Senator Marie Cantwell is a key here, and she's ignoring this issue. And if enough of you call and say, you cannot ignore this issue, this is important to me, she's going to have enough support to do the right thing and say to BLM, okay, you're going to have to prove to us now that your numbers are legitimate and we want an independent count, and that's how it has to be.
Oh, I agree with that totally.
Yeah.
The time for humane responsibility is right now, and
Yeah.
that doesn't mean that we're going to use the terms of some of these larger non-profit organizations that think humane responsibility is darting and treating the horses badly and that kind of thing. It means that they're to be set out there in their ecological habitats and actually benefit from the habitat, but also provide a benefit to the habitats that are out there on our public lands. A single species priority, such as cattle, does not provide that whatsoever, and it destroys our ecological habitats and our you destroy enough ecological habitats on the small island features, and then all of a sudden our environmental landscape starts to change on the more vast realm, and we start having things like we're having now, climate warming, a vast amount of wildlife kill-off. I think it's on the 56, 57% percentile now, and it's not slowing down. And this is all because of a single species priority of cattle being on public and federal land and that kind of thing. And so there's no small critters or medium-sized critters that can exist there any longer, because that also inhibits the feeding situation of this single priority in non-indigenous species. So we have that to look at as well.
Well, you know, right now we're watching BLM's adoption program, and there's this cowboy, and he's got this beautiful, you know, wild horse that is now enslaved. And this guy is, you know, doing a quick training program, waving flags at him. And the poor horse is, you know, has to be like a person who's enslaved. And confused and all that. It's just so tragic. This horse and all of our horses need to be out in the land so that they can regenerate the soil and, you know, help us with the fire hazards that are going on in the buildup of fuels and all that. So I want to thank you so much for your investigation. And is there anything else you want to add before we close?
Well, of course, we could go into several minutes on that TIP program and the training program. That's also another outlet of corruption, but we don't have time. But I would like to reemphasize the fact of being humanely responsible instead of just kind of, well, as long as we're making money and, you know, they're not fulfilling any kind of money-making situation, so we got to get rid of them.
Yeah.
And I'm talking about the wild horses. It's ridiculous to have this livestock mentality.
Well,
because there's a lot of destruction that goes with that mindset.
Well, we're asking, you know, I know Craig Downer and I and you, and Ann Novak, we're asking for the horses to be returned to their herd areas, and in the event that they need a drop food program because of drought or whatever, that's supplied to them as it was in the old days, but that's really not necessary. And yes, it is important for people to understand that horses do die out there, and this is what the I think the mentality they're trying to play upon is saying, oh, these horses are starving. Well, you can see from the roundups they're not starving, but there are horses that are going to die out there. That's just like deer. Do we round up all the deer? Do we round up all the bear, the cougars, everything, because their teeth get worn down and they can no longer hunt or whatever? Do we have to round up every single animal? This is not under NEPA. These are wild animals. They need to be treated as such.
That is true, and quite frankly, that's a tropical cascade effect. So animals are out there, they live and die, there's apex predators, and a lot of diversity needs to happen within a healthy ecological habitat in order for it to function and process as something very healthy on our public lands. We're a grain-fed society. We need our grasslands, we need our grains, everything, the substances that that are in our stores, you know, about, 60 or 70% of them are grain-based or some type of grass-based. We can't afford all this water and all this feeding that's going on by a non-indigenous single priority species mindset.
That's
so,
right. Yeah.
and that cascade effect is very significant in the fact that, yes, the breed control and that kind of thing are kind of self-maintaining situations when you have a healthy ecological zone. And you can go from apex predation, top to bottom, or even bottom to top. It's not as healthy, but it's healthier than what we have now with the single priority situation of cattle. So we're going to have to start thinking about that real quick. We're ruining our environment by this mindset that we have that we think we can kill anything that's not money producing, and that's not true. That's we're all connected in one way or another with our habitat.
And you can see the beautiful habitat these wild horses are being rounded up from, and according to BLM, it's all been trampled over, and there's nothing for these horses to eat. And it's all a big lie, folks. Go out there and see for yourself. See if you can find any wild horses, and you'll find some small bands, as Craig Downer and I went out for 4 days looking for, and just continue. I want all of you to continue calling your Congress members, because it is working. You are doing an immense amount, and you are giving these Congress people and these senators the strength to stand up to this corrupt, agency that is literally being guided by the ranchers that want to just abuse our public lands, and the mining and the coal industry and all that would just love to take this land. So continue your good work, everyone, and keep calling. Call Senator Cantwell. That's very, very important. There's her number there on the screen, and let her know you saw this show and you want her to do her job, which is to represent the wildlife of America. We go out there and we see cattle, but we don't see any wildlife at all, and we certainly don't see our wild horses and burros. So thank you.
We want to have, Annie, if I could barge in
Yes.
there for a second, and I apologize.
No, not at all.
But what we need is for people to discuss with the senators and congressmen the fact that the Bureau of Land Management nor the Forestry Department, the USDA Forestry, are providing enough evidence in order to have roundups in the first place within the environmental assessment, which is a legal process within NEPA. So they're not providing the public on appropriate situations in order to create the budget for the roundup to begin with.
Well, that's because Betsy Bina, who happens to be the staff person that collects all the information for the Appropriations Committee, she told me she does not take any public input. And I said, look, you mean you only take BLM? That's all the input? And she said, we do not take any public input. So anyone who's like you, like me, like people who are spending immense amounts of money to do flyovers, that doesn't count. The only thing that counts is BLM. And this has to stop. It really does. So Betsy Bina, who is a staff person that gathers all the information, refuses to look at the white papers, the letter I sent her from Congressman Farr, the report from the OIG. She apparently doesn't take anything like that, And that's the problem, is you can't get to these committee. I've called the committee now 4 times in the Natural Energy Resources Committee, which I was told to do by Senator Cantwell's office. He's ignoring me. David Brooks is ignoring me. And that's his job, is to take information, and he refuses. So they're being paid to just ignore us. And but we just keep calling, you see, and we tell them, I'm not going to eat any beef from public lands. I am going to now Google where in my area I have private ranchers that I can buy beef from, and I'm going to buy beef from them. That's a big impact. And better yet, going vegan is number one. But if you can't do that, this is a venue that you can do. And where the buck stops there, when they're not making money out there on those public lands, then that's when we're going to start seeing our horses being returned, I believe.
Well, one of the problems with that, what we found with welfare ranching, is a lot of them send a lot of the beef that they raise to Japan, part of the EU, Italy, and France, and now South Korea and some of the other countries. And the problem I have with it is that I noticed that we're paying them with our taxpayer money a subsidy. They only do less than 1% of domestic sales on welfare beef raised on public lands, but yet we're paying them, I think, a small area in Arizona, in northern Arizona. There's 8 ranches there, and we paid them between 2005 and I believe it was 2016, $88.8 million. Now, you take that and multiply it by the rest of the United States, and we're talking about, I think it's about, 4 or 5% of the ranchers in the United States are welfare ranchers. And you come up with a pretty hefty amount of money there, and maybe a couple of billion.
What are you talking about? You mean all the welfare ranchers are, what are they doing? And now we only have like 4 minutes, but you're saying how much? $8 billion for these welfare ranchers?
Well, they receive subsidies and that kind of thing. I was talking about 8 ranches that are in northern Arizona. Mm-hmm. Just 8 ranches. They're welfare ranchers. They drive their cattle on public lands, and between 2005 and 2016, they acquired from our government $88.8 million. That's a small ranching community that wants the wild horses taken off our public lands. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, if you multiply that, my point being is if you multiply that by the rest of the welfare ranchers throughout the United States, then you're talking about billions of dollars, because they're at 4 or 4.5% of our total ranchers is welfare ranching. So they make a lot of money in a year. Mm-hmm. Who is it?
Well, now we've only got a minute left, so I think we're going to have to wrap this up.
All right. Well, it's pretty interesting stuff. That Ted Turner makes about $3.5 million a year.
Yeah, on his bison program.
No, it's a welfare ranching program for the cattle he has on public land.
Yeah. So he's a welfare rancher too, huh?
Yes. So
okay,
anyway,
well, we have to close now, unfortunately. But folks, do your job. Call Senator Patty Murray. She's there on that committee that's supposed to reduce tax waste. Do your part, and you are, and we are going to save our wildlife on public lands. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Annie Griffin, your host, and this is Meet America.